Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben. This summer I will be testing, comparing, and eventually building both of these big bore dual sport dinosaurs into something that I can run down the freeway loaded with camping gear, then get off of the pavement, find a camp spot, set everything up, and then take off down some single track and hopefully enjoy it. So if that sounds like something that is interesting to you guys, don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you watching along. Now, as many mods as I plan on doing to these bikes, I've got to say they really are set up pretty well from the factory to handle everything from highway to single track. And as a previous XR650 owner, 2 times actually, I was really kind of surprised to realize that when I first got on these 2 machines. I thought all 650s were sort of created equally, but if you're somebody that's looking for something with a little bit more than 40 ponies, then there really hasn't been a great option out there until this bike came out in 2016. In contrast to the rather standard 40 horsepower on the Japanese thumpers, the newest version of the 701 pumps out a record-breaking 74 horsepower. It also comes standard with a 6-speed fuel injection and ABS, which is unheard of on the big bore dual sport dinosaurs. So with all those amazing specs and features, you would think that the 701 would be flying off of the showroom floor, while the Japanese manufacturers are sent back to the drawing board to try to bring these archaic machines into the 21st century. However, if you look at the numbers, it turns out that's not really the case. To give you guys a better idea of why, I'm gonna hop on the 701 and we'll run down the same circuit with some gravel, some pavement, some highway, some off-road, as I did with both of these 2 bikes just a couple days ago. If you guys missed that video, I would highly recommend you check it out. I'll put a link for it down in the description. For right now though, let's suit up and take this bad boy out for a rip.
Nothing but beautiful blue sky and some white wispy clouds today, so I don't have to worry about any rain showers, but I will start the 701 ride here off of the bike because very similar to the DR650, the 701 here really, just does not take much to get up off of the side stand. Of course, the length of the side stand and the angle of the bike can kind of play into that a bit. I don't want to give you guys the wrong idea, but this bike is very similar to the DR, where it feels very light on its feet, and that is, I think, or at least has something to do with the fact that this bike actually is lowered, which is going to affect the entire ride. Anytime you change the geometry, even slightly on a bike, it's going to affect the handling and in every aspect of the bike, everything from off-road to the highway. It's going to change it slightly. It's also going to make it much easier for somebody like me at 5'10" with a 31-inch inseam to get onto. And honestly, I think this bike would be just as difficult for me to get on and ride as the XR, because I believe this has just about the same seat height, but this was professionally lowered 2.5 inches. So this bike also has some pretty big differences. Like, for one, the key is where the gas tank should be, and the, back half of the bike essentially is a gas tank. Just inside of these fairings is a whole big tank here. Really kind of a neat design, sort of distributes the weight, obviously quite a bit different than any other motorcycle. This one is fuel injected, so no choke. It also sounds a bit like a washing machine, and I did try a different pipe on this, which ended up just being way too loud. But this thing, it definitely doesn't need any performance increases. Whoa, yeah, okay. Not on the XR, not on the DR, we're on the 701. Oh man, I think I'm gonna have to get rid of it just for that reason. This is just an insane motorcycle, and I think anybody that has ridden one of these, I would say, or would think, would have to agree. This thing is just nuts compared to, especially the KLR, but even the DR, and really the XR too. It doesn't feel quite as, I keep using the word intense, and I don't know if that's really right. It doesn't give me the same feeling like the XR does, and maybe that's just the sound and the vibration of the motor, where this bike, it literally has twice the horsepower, and even the at-the-wheel horsepower, which is of course brought down because you lose horsepower through heat transfer between the engine and the back wheel actually putting the bike into motion. Regardless of any of those losses, doesn't matter what number you look at, this bike has double or more than double the horsepower of the KLR, the XR, and the DR, and probably any other bike that's even close to this. I guess I don't know what the XR450 has for horsepower and torque, but I mean, this is a monster. This is not a bike for beginners at all, honestly. With over 10 years of riding experience under my belt, man, this is still kind of a lot of bike for me. And of course, it's something I think you could get used to and, you know, manage after a while, but especially switching back and forth between the XR, the DR, and this, boy, I gotta remember which bike I'm on, because this thing is nuts. And it definitely feels a bit more like the DR does as far as the handling goes, and I'm really interested to see when I do lower the XR650. You gotta hang on this bike. When I got this bike, it did not have this gripper seat on it, so I was sliding all over the place anytime I hit the gas. But this is just nuts. And the entire video is not going to be me just telling you how crazy this bike is, I promise. When I lower the XR, though, I think it will feel probably a bit more like this bike, or at least I hope that it does, because honestly, out of the three, this is probably the most fun, the most comfortable, and like I said already 100 times, the most impressive bike to ride by far. I mean, this just has specs that neither of those bikes can touch. As far as the sound and the vibrations and everything go, it's something that, like I said, I kind of get used to after I ride it enough. But honestly, after riding the DR and especially the XR, jumping on this and hearing it and kind of feeling it through all the contact points, it's not really as nice or as cool, and I guess maybe that's just because I really do sort of like the, I guess maybe archaic thump that both the DR and especially the XR pump out. This bike just feels tighter and like more precision, yet it actually, the bars vibrate more, which I don't really completely understand. And if you guys have ever ridden a KTM or a Husqvarna, they're far more geared towards performance and kind of, I think, a younger crowd than, I guess, the ancient XR and the DR. I don't know what the actual percentage is, but I would guess a very large portion of these bikes get sold in the Supermoto trim, just because they kind of cater towards that type of person, I think. But honestly, I mean, I and the guy that I bought this from, I think, would agree that this is by far, I mean, one of the coolest dual sports to turn into an adventure bike, and that's actually what he did with it, is would run BDRs on it. And man, I mean, it is a great dual sport. It's a great bike to ride trails on. It's a great bike to ride wheelies on. I mean, it is a very, very capable motorcycle. It's just about the same weight as the XR and the DR. I think it might be right between the two. If not, it's very, very similar numbers. And a lot of the numbers around this bike and those are fairly similar, other than, again, the horsepower and the torque. But like I said, it is a very, very different feeling motorcycle in comparison to those two. It definitely has really good on-road manners, probably better than the XR, again, I think just because it's lowered. It's fairly similar to the DR, but feels very different because it's just laid out a lot different. Even stock, these are the stock bars actually, the bars are extremely straight. They're almost a hair too straight for me. They're just to the point where I can kind of start to feel that my wrists don't exactly enjoy being at that angle. I do have the rocks offset risers on here that bring them up and forward a bit. That definitely helps. I mean, it makes standing on this bike just not quite as good as the T7, because the bars aren't quite as high as I think they could be. But I mean, if you're actually in an attack position to ride off-road and do a fair job at it, I mean, this is a perfect bike for that. I like that the foot pegs are a decent ways away from the bars. I like that they are wide. I mean, they're, I think, the only set of stock, or one of the only sets of stock pegs that I've used that are actually good. Woo! It definitely gives me some confidence out here. I don't know. I think it doesn't feel as good as the DR. The DR650 definitely feels more planted. Not more planted, more, I don't know. If the DR650 feels like glued to the road, and like you can't hardly do anything wrong, although I did almost wash the front end out and lose it last time, I guess. But I don't know, this has the exact same tires as the DR does. but it just, there's something about it, just that transfer, that doesn't quite feel as solid. And that was like the first thing that I noticed when I took the first DR that I had ever been on for a test ride for my buddy Jason when he bought his. And there's just nothing else that I've been on since. I mean, even this, and I kind of thought this would be the same, honestly. I'm really surprised that it's not, or similar anyways, more similar. It doesn't make me feel near as uncomfortable as the XR does, kind of going from side to side. And again, that bike I think is definitely far more capable off-road. But as far as gravel riding goes, I think it's just too high up. I don't know. I mean, this thing's almost as close to the ground as the DR is. I don't really understand what the difference would be. I guess possibly just the rake. I wonder what the rake is on this compared to, I guess, the DR and the XR. So that's essentially how far, or not how far, it's the angle that the forks stick out from sort of a vertical line drawn just in the air, not relative to the bike. So that can definitely affect things like that, and I guess maybe that's what it is. I did notice in the garage, pushing these two around, that this bike, the steering is much easier, regardless of whether the bike's leaned or turned or, you know, what you're doing with it. The bars just pretty much always turn easy, where the DR, you can, I think, kind of get into a situation where if you're moving it around and you turn the tire, the bars all the way one way, the bike kind of feels like it wants to fall a bit. Where this bike, it kind of doesn't do that. So I would assume that has to do with the rake and the geometry, or maybe even something to do with the fact that this bike was professionally lowered. I mean, anytime you change a bike from stock, you could possibly, you know, throw things off, and just bringing yourself lower down on the forks changes things drastically, or can change things drastically. So I mean, take a lot of this with a grain of salt. This is not a stock bike, and it's not gonna feel probably exactly or anywhere near maybe the same as a brand new 2024 model. There are, I guess, a few differences between this bike and a brand new model on the floor, on the showroom floor. This one has a smaller sprocket in the front compared to when it was new, but I believe that the gear ratio is actually about the same. So those bumps that I guess I took a different line there that threw me off on the DR650. This bike, as far as the suspension goes, I think probably is better than both. However, better than the DR and the XR. However, the XR has, especially now that this thing's lowered, way more suspension travel. So I have bottomed this thing out. Not that I have the adjustments dialed in or bottomed out. So maybe I could avoid some of that, but I think just the fact that this thing was lowered, I think, is going to degrade the suspension. I mean, there's no way around that, and the same thing's going to happen with the XR when I lower that. But I do a lot more riding where having a lowered bike will be much more helpful than having a bike that has 12 inches of suspension travel. I don't really find myself on motocross tracks all that often, but when I took this bike out there, that is when I was bottoming it here and there. And it definitely is still a heavy bike for that type of riding, obviously. It's definitely a heavy bike for single track riding, but the adventure ride that I took this thing on when my dad and I went camping, I would have to say that this thing was just about perfect for that. And really, I think with a rally fairing on the front, could make a darn nice adventure bike. Even with the little fairing that I've got on here, it's not bad. And my shaky fake double take mirrors, I don't think there's anybody back there, so you can definitely see how much the bars move. Let's try to do a 0 to 60 without falling off of the back of this thing or doing a wheelie. Let's try to do a 0 to 60 without falling off of the back of this thing or doing a wheelie. Ready, go. Whoa. Oh yeah. GPS can't even keep up. Honestly, I think this bike is the most impressive machine that I've ever ridden. I mean, this thing is a beast. I mean, those other two and the KLR, and really, I mean, any of the bikes that I've owned recently, I do often pin the throttle when I'm taking off to really just see what it can do. Where this bike, man, maybe I'm getting close, but the majority of the time, if I ever do get that close, I mean, it's getting to the point where it's too much. And again, if I put more time on it, maybe it wouldn't be, but this is a very surprising and exciting and exhilarating motorcycle to ride. I think the best way to describe this engine in comparison to the XR and the DR is that those are more like a deep, throaty thump. This is like a high-frequency buzz, kind of, and it doesn't really sound good. And coming through the bars, I mean, it's kind of not. And maybe if I had a squishier set of grips, that would be better. These are Oxford heated grips, so they're pretty thick and that don't really have any give to them. Now, I've said that I've ridden bikes where you get done riding them and you get like kind of a weird feeling in your hands or your feet from being kind of buzzed from riding for long periods of time. I've never really had that with this bike, and it's not something that I would be concerned or worried about. I mean, it's a little annoying to see it in the mirrors, or to not see anything through the mirrors, I guess I should say. But it's not something that I would say should keep you away from this bike. I want to make the point that I really do enjoy the sort of deep chug of the other two, where this one, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a thumper to me, I guess, and I don't know what the difference is. I mean, I guess maybe I do. I suppose the XR and the DR both have compression ratios below 10:1, where this is, I believe, a bit higher than that. Now, along with the compression ratio, this was obviously designed in the last century here, where the other ones were written down on a stone tablet. And, I mean, obviously that could have something to do with it. I don't know. I mean, it in a sense does feel like it's a higher precision, which I guess maybe would explain the sort of tighter feeling compared to the big, maybe kind of sloppy thumpers. But I don't really know, because, I mean, a bike like this, you look out on the internet and there's quite a few people that have issues with them. Now, again, just like I kind of said last time with a KLR versus an XR, those are two very different bikes, and I think two very different owners. I kind of wonder, with bikes that are higher strung, if some of the problems that you see are because they're engineered poorly, or because the person that's going to ride them is going to ride the heck out of them, where somebody on a KLR or a DR, they're not really gonna be too mean to it too often. Beyond that, the slave cylinder for the clutch, which is hydraulic, so we've got a little master cylinder there with some fluid in it, just like we do for the brake reservoir, a little bit smaller, of course. So there's basically something that acts similar to your calipers that squeeze the brake pads into the rotor down on this side of the bike here, and that basically actuates your clutch instead of a cable running through there and pulling on a little lever that sticks out of the engine to actuate it. That can have some problems. I mean, brakes hopefully don't have any problems. Why should hydraulics, right? I have no idea. The parts that they're putting on it nowadays are probably better. This bike had the master cylinder replaced. It's definitely something that I would keep an eye on or keep track of if you buy an older model of these. And don't take my word for that the new ones are better. I honestly have no idea if they are. I know they did make some updates recently, and I think they're actually selling it with a windshield like this, or selling a windshield to be mounted to one. This is actually just fastened right to the headlight cowl or whatever, and just kind of stand off of it with some bolts. Other than that, I mean, it's basically just your average dual sport. The wind protection, I don't know, probably makes the mic actually sound worse. It does help keep the wind off my chest, but that's about it. I have also seen a few of them that have had sort of top end issues, people with parts that are missing some of their parts, so that kind of makes me a little bit nervous. But to be honest, if you're gonna buy one of these, I think you just kind of have to be ready for that and be excited enough about the overall performance and the package that you're getting, that just gonna kind of have to not worry about any of the problems that you might have down the road. If you're to buy this as an only motorcycle, I think that would make me a little bit nervous to just have this, just because of those issues. I mean, any bike you buy, it could have issues. I wouldn't stay away from this specifically because of that, unless that's something that would really bother you, or you don't have, a dealership anywhere near you that you could take it to if you needed help, or if you don't have the know-how to do it yourself. I mean, some of that stuff I think is something you need to take into consideration, especially if you're going to buy one of these and turn it into somewhat of an adventure bike. The DR, the KLR, the XR, those bikes have been around for so long that they've got tons of aftermarket support and parts and people with knowledge and know-how on them, where this bike, they just aren't, yikes, that many people out there riding them in comparison to the big Japanese thumpers. And even that in itself is probably a pretty good reason to go with one of those. But if you're going to get one of those and just not be happy with that 40 horsepower, I mean, this isn't a bad option. Sure, it's expensive. You could get a T7 for much cheaper, but at 350 pounds, man, I mean, this is a heck of a bike compared to the Tenere. I mean, it's faster than the Tenere. It's definitely got more wheelie potential. It's definitely better off-road. I mean, unless you're really looking to put some highway miles on, between this and a T7, man, I would personally probably take one of these. Of course, this thing could end up in a shop 3 hours from my house for 6 months or more in a row, where the T7, I mean, I could pretty much take it anywhere to get it worked on. This bike actually makes a really nice noise that I think comes from the air intake, actually. So how about the highway? Both the DR and the XR, the very first time that I took them up to highway speeds or something close to it, I was super impressed, because I didn't think that anything in a single cylinder, thumper anyway, could be nearly as good on the highway as this bike right here. So like I said, this is geared differently compared to what it would have been completely stock, but I believe the showroom floor models will have the same exact ratio now, because they've got, I believe, a bigger rear sprocket, I think, where this one just has a tooth down in the front. But anyway, we are not doing highway speeds yet. Come on me, not come on bike. Oh, now we lost power. Okay, 71 indicated on the display that you guys can't see, which I guess we'll just roll with that, since the XR and the DR are probably off too. So 65 indicated on the GPS. This bike is probably smoother than either one. Either the DR or the XR, a little bit of a buzz in the handlebars, but it almost kind of smooths out a bit at this speed. Definitely feels more than capable. It's got tons and tons of power, and I mean, we're not maxed out at all. It does drop down a little bit when I let off. But in general, a very, very friendly bike to ride on the highway. Super capable, feels super solid. I would not hesitate to ride this bike on the road for a long time, keeping in mind that it is still a single cylinder and not, nearly as smooth as something like the Tenere 700. Although now that I say that, I think that bike actually had a bit of a vibration in the bars once he got up to around 70. So I think you can kind of run into that no matter what bike you're on. If you're on a bike with knobbies on the highway, humming along at 70 miles an hour, I mean, you're going to pick up a little bit of vibration. In general, though, this is a pretty smooth bike. Now, if you guys have seen the videos that I've put out on this bike before, the biggest complaint, or really the only complaint that I've ever had about it, is the fact that the bars don't really turn as far as most other bikes do, and I guess maybe that's why it doesn't feel like it wants to fall over like the DR does. I think I can still get a decent amount of radius to turn around on a road here. So yeah, that's not really a problem. I can make a circle no problem at all on the paved road. But off-road, that can kind of be a problem, and even in the garage, it can kind of get annoying. And now it's about time for a brake check here, right now. Ooh, yeah, this thing definitely has more than enough stopping power. This is just a high-performance machine. If you're gonna go fast, you gotta be able to stop fast too. So after being on this bike for a while now, I've got to say, man, it is a pretty darn comfy machine. As much as it is sort of an insane weapon of a motorcycle, I mean, it really is just kind of nice to get on this thing and just cruise too. I mean, it definitely feels like it wants more, but it's always, I don't know, it seems happy enough just kind of putting along like this. I mean, it's super nice to stand up on. It's really pretty comfy to sit on, especially with the bars up and further away from me now. I mean, it's a darn good bike to get on and cruise. And I mean, I really would not hesitate to take this thing on really any of the adventures that I take in my other bikes on. I have kind of gotten it into my head that it is less reliable, but I mean, just because some of these bikes are unreliable, it doesn't mean all of them are going to be. It doesn't mean anything is going to go wrong with mine. But I mean, I think it is something you do kind of have to take into consideration. So off-road, I've got to say this is definitely an impressive bike. It is a little bit heavier than I think it sort of feels to begin with. It definitely gives me a lot of confidence, but then can also sort of come back and bite me when I lose traction. Whoa! Or lose track of what I'm doing. And with the lowered seat height, let's see if we can get myself turned around here like we did with the other two. Whoa! There's a tree back there somewhere. Yeah, definitely feeling much more comfortable with the lowered suspension on here. Oh! Well, now let's not drop it. That wasn't part of the plan. Okay, I'm just in the wrong spot, and we've got some wet soil, so this is probably a worthless test. As long as I don't end up on my side, though, I don't care. Okay, there we go. We made it. So yeah, suspension definitely feels good. A bit like the XR. I don't know if it's better or worse, though, honestly. I don't really know. Definitely gives me confidence. I like that. I feel like I'm in control. Not really having any issues with the rocks or anything. It doesn't feel too wallowy or sloppy. Yeah, definitely a capable bike. Not that I would expect anything else from the KTM or Husqvarna name. It certainly does much better off-road than I think you would assume a bike of its size would.
So if this bike is so light and so capable and has so much more power than somebody like me could ever need, then why do I have these two motorcycles, and why don't I ever ride this bike or make any videos on it? Now see, the thing is, I do and I have, but unfortunately, it seems that the audience for this bike in comparison to something like this or this is quite a bit smaller. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these are under $10,000, somewhere around $7,000 new, much cheaper, somewhere around the $4,000 market used with a couple thousand miles on it, where this bike, to buy it brand new, is somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, double these. And when you go to buy them used, they don't really seem to drop in value a whole lot, or at least not near the $4,000 mark like these do, which I think is just a much more friendly number for a lot of people, myself included. And quite honestly, there's not really that much that you're missing out on riding one of these in comparison to this. I mean, this bike, sure, it has way more power, sure, it's super capable, sure, it's really good off-road, and yes, it's got more accessories, more electronics, stuff that actually works and seems to be smart enough to be used off-road. But do you really need any of that? Is that worth $7,000 more? It seems like most people don't really think so. And I think there are some diehard fans out there. I think there are a lot of people that really would appreciate this bike, but these are just so much more in reach. They are a lot cheaper to maintain. You don't have to worry about finding parts for them because the aftermarket has such a wide expanse of even just regular old replacement parts. You've got all sorts of different accessories that you can slap on one of these. And the aftermarket has sort of caught up with this bike because in all reality, as much as it is a relatively new design in comparison, it actually has been out on the market for a while now. So there are parts out there, there are used parts out there, but in general, I think the majority of riders, at least in the US anyways, are just much more comfortable with a Suzuki or a Honda. It's stuff that we know, it's stuff that we trust, it's stuff that we see our neighbors riding around on, where this bike just isn't quite in the same category. And even though they are sort of all in the same class, this is a very different, very amazing motorcycle that just doesn't quite fit the needs of the majority like these bikes do. And that's why I've really considered selling this bike to put the money towards something that the vast majority of dual sport riders could afford, would want to afford, and would trust. But I gotta tell you, after riding around on this thing again, as much as I love these bikes, this thing is just special, and I don't know that I can let it go. So we'll see how this video does. I don't know. I really thought I had myself talked into getting rid of it, but man, it's just such a cool bike. If you guys ever have the chance and are not too concerned about the sort of reliability factors or the lack of good customer care, maybe, I guess, in the dealerships. I don't know that any dealership is really great, even for these guys. My dealers that I've been through have been okay, but they're looking to make money. They're not really looking to help you out. So I think no matter what, you're going to run into some of that. But there, I think, definitely is a very specific audience for this bike. And if you have a chance to be part of the minority that has ridden and owned one of these things, I would not hesitate to. It's an amazing bike. Just be very, very careful with the throttle. It is a bike that I think will make others look not quite as impressive, I think maybe. But needless to say, I am still very excited about both of these two. I think these are excellent machines. And honestly, I think they are just far more practical in general. Nobody really needs a bike like this. These two, however, I think anyone that enjoys getting out and enjoying this beautiful world and likes spending some time in the outdoors in the middle of nowhere, I think could definitely appreciate one of these. They can get you to work during the week. You can have a little bit of fun since they do have enough power to play around with, yet aren't anything absolutely insane like the 701, yet they can get you off on the trails and enjoying some beautiful woods and some beautiful wilderness. So if you guys have the opportunity to ride any of these motorcycles or anything else, please make sure you get out and do that. You never know how many days you have left on this beautiful planet, so get out and enjoy it. That's what God put it and us here for, so make sure you get out and do that. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, stay safe, and stay swanky.